I'm Dr. Gerald Deas. Welcome to Health Center from Downstate Medical Center. This year is my 45th year at Downstate Medical Center. I came here in 1958 as a student. Spent 4 years in medical school and 4 years in residency in internal medicine right across the street at Kings County Hospital. In the day that I came, these days that I came here, not many blacks or African Americans were getting into medicine. In fact, there was only 2 in my class. My friend Leo Stewart, who became a pediatrician, but I even took care of both of his parents until they died, even as a doctor, because they lived right in Queens and he moved out to California. But the thing is that when I was here at the medical school, I had been in the Army. I had gotten 2 master's degrees, one in biochemistry and one in public health, master's in public health from the University of Michigan. I had to, plus 2 years in the Army during the Korean conflict. I was drafted during the Korean War right out of college while I was taking my master's. I was supposed to graduate in June, and they took me out in April. They didn't let me finish. So the school, which I was going to at that time, Brooklyn College, allowed me to take the final exam in April rather than in June, so I could have my master's degree. And so there was a whole lot of things we had to do as African-American young people getting into medicine. Most of my friends spent their medical education across the seas. Some went to Belgium, some went to France, Mexico, Switzerland was a big place that they used to go to. And they had to go and learn medicine in a different language. Can you imagine learning? Medicine is hard enough, but can you imagine learning medicine in another language such as Spanish or French and taking your exams in those languages? They would give you oral exams. And so we as a group of physicians, just a year, went through a whole lot. Folks have no idea, from Daniel Hale Williams, who was able to open the chest and stop a stab wound or a person from bleeding to death, the first heart surgery he sewed up the heart itself that had been nicked by a knife as such in Chicago, to now that we have some of the greatest surgeons, such as Ben Carson's in neurosurgery, John Hopkins. He's a head of the pediatric neurosurgery department, a young man who wrote a book called Gifted Hands, of showing how he, even down in Detroit and places like that, was not recognized as being anything significant until he went on to good colleges in Harvard and medical school, and went on to become a chief of neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital. So, but I think in that span of time, from my time to his time to other times, how many brains were lost? How many young people who could have been excellent doctors or might have found cures for so many things, as you know, Evelyn at Johns Hopkins Hospital also, Evelyn Thomas, he showed Blaylock, who was the head surgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital, how to do the surgery for blue babies. And of course, Blaylock got all of the credit for it, but Thomas, our picture today, he was given an honorary doctor degree. His picture hangs next to Blaylock at Johns Hopkins Hospital. So how many Thomases have we lost? I mean, he should have been in medical school. He should have been the Blaylock or any of the other heart surgeons. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there. Right now, we are here, and we have to start educating African American for medicine, because we are losing the numbers. It's bad because of bad grammar school as well as high school, and people not introduced to sciences early enough to be interested, because you cannot start majoring in science in college. It has to be, you have to have preparation, because physics is hard, biochemistry is hard, organic chemistry is hard, all the things, calculus, all those kind of things that they have as gatekeepers you have to get into medical school and do well in it. You can't be a C, and hardly can be a B. But if you get a B and an A, that's much better than a C, because a C will bring down your average. But today we are going to talk to Ike Swaby, a third-year medical student who I met when he first came in, and he had been through his changes before he got into medical school. I mean, he was not just geared toward medicine, or people were preparing him just for medicine. He's been through a lot of things himself and so forth. So I want to welcome you.
Thank you, Dr. Deas.
Dr.
Thank you.
Swaby.
Thank you, thank you.
Nice
Yeah.
having you here with
Yeah,
us
Dr.
today.
Deas.
You
I
know?
would like to thank you for the opportunity to come onto this program, and,
Right.
and you know, it's an opportunity to reach the community,
Right.
and that's golden. I want to thank you
Yeah.
for that, and just hearing about the proud legacy you're talking about, I'm glad to be a part of that, and share the humble, very humble example of my own,
Yeah. Right.
strengths and foibles, and,
Yeah.
and hopefully, we'll see how the program goes.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I know you're a third-year student now. For you to get to the third year, you're well on your way to getting that MD degree in another year, you know, and be on your way to
Step by
specialize
step.
and things, step by step. That's right. In fact, we have to start thinking of that. It is a inch by inch, step by step, and not let it be turned around. But getting back into your education and getting to this level, this was not a hop, skip, and jump type of thing with you, and you had to have certain things that you had to conquer along the way and things like this. But starting right off from public school, how did that start? To high school, how did that start? Right over to your college and things like this.
Well, first of all, I always had a curious mind as a child.
Uh-huh.
I was a kid who was always asking why. Why is the sky blue? Why do things fall when you throw them up? And I remember, my parents' friends always said that you're always asking a lot of questions. So I was automatically kind of drawn to science.
I see.
I remember reading a book on how the batteries worked by the Italian inventor Galvano, I think was his name. And that was from the age of about 7. I remember I really was, science just explained everything to me. And so I was naturally drawn to it. I went through, my family, we'd always been emigrating back and forth between Jamaica and America.
Right.
We were true Jamaicans, immigrating. And I started out public school, grade school in Jamaica, came up, went up to about 6th grade, went back down, and then to Jamaica, and then finished up 9th grade, and then started 9th grade, came up, finished 9th grade up here, and then went on to finish up high school out in Oyster Bay, Long Island.
Now,
So I'd really been bouncing around a lot,
right. But that 9th grade in Jamaica, did you find the educational system different than when you came to America? Was it more organized, or it's not organized, was it more intense with behavior, studying, and all those things? Do you think that set a pattern for you?
In my opinion, some might say it's arguable, but I think that, the British system, and particularly in Jamaica, they push the science and the math.
Okay.
They definitely, it's a big push in the schools, and, a lot of it's a stereotypical dream that a lot of, young Jamaican boys will want to grow up to be an engineer.
Right, yes.
And the young women will want to grow up to be nurses. So I think science is definitely pushed. The British system, I found it to be, in a way, slightly more rigorous. There wasn't one sentence answers to questions. You gave a paragraph when you answered. You brought everything you knew to bear on a subject when you answered the question.
Right.
And there were certain strictures in the school, just little things like discipline, wearing uniform, standing up when you talk to teachers, and like I was saying, there's an emphasis on the math and the sciences. So actually, when I came across, and I actually enrolled in school up at Ontiora High School up in Boyceville, near Woodstock, believe it or not. That was the first place I went to. They actually wanted to carry me back down to 8th grade, and me and my mom said, no. If anything, you want to put them to 10th grade. So there was a compromise, and they landed me in 9th grade. And already the math they were doing, I found to be a little behind what I was doing in Jamaica. So math and science. But to be fair, I think that the English probably, some of the literature studies were probably more advanced up here. That was what I found. But on the whole, there's a huge amount of pride and value in education within Jamaica.
Right.
And so students are very serious, and that's something that I found coming up right away. Is that the students back home were very serious. It was actually more competitive for me back home. I remember that.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
And so then when you came up here, you went to Oyster Bay High School.
Yep. That's where I ended up finishing up high school from 10th through 12th grade.
Right.
And continued my interest in the sciences.
Right. Sure.
I got involved in sports. Got involved in lots of extracurriculars.
What type of sports were you involved in?
I was an avid soccer player.
Uh-huh.
Avid track runner. and also the martial arts. I've been practicing martial arts from an early age.
I see.
Like I had an uncle who was in the martial arts,
Right.
and I also enrolled in things like mock trial club. I tried to start a science club in the school. They didn't have a science club because I thought that, you know, one of the big things with math and science is, and this is going back to Jamaica, I had a professor who you know, brought mathematics. He imbued it with such enthusiasm that it really brought it alive to the students.
Wow, that's
so I
wonderful.
always thought that, you know, the reason why math is so hard, science is, you know, we have a lot of teachers who just aren't exciting the students, aren't teaching it the right way. So I wanted to start a science club in the school to kind of further science education, science projects. And
were you successful in doing that?
Yeah, I laid the groundwork of it. You know, I had some talks with the principal, and you know, there was, you know, I was really enrolled in a lot of extracurriculars back then. I started to do a little research.
Well, you know, this is really interesting because a few years ago, I was the first African American to speak at the Intel Westinghouse conference in Philadelphia.
Yes.
They had it in Philadelphia Convention Hall. There must have been hundreds of students who had won in their community the science prize from all over the world. And it was amazing how few African Americans or any other African was in that science fair. And I really felt remiss to think that we're not getting, we know just as much, but we're not getting the exposure that these young students in the Intel Westinghouse was getting, you know. Each one had a fantastic area where they had the experiments set up, and I don't mean juvenile experiments. I'm talking about stuff that the industry could use. You know what I mean? Right away. You know, condensation of water right from the air. You know, if you have low water, you could machines that would condense the atmosphere, the vapors in the air, and bring you some water. You know, things like that. But just wonderful things. And
fantastic ideas, no doubt.
Fantastic ideas. You know.
See, one of the things you see with young minds is they're not aware so much of some of the limitations.
That's it.
And so they tend to think outside the box.
That's
you know, you have a lot of computer whizzes who are 13. There was this famous case of this kid who was 13, and he you know, found a way to hack into the National Treasury, and you're like, you know, of course that's a criminal act, but like, wow, how could a 13-year-old figure that out? You know?
That's right.
But you know, on addressing why isn't there more minorities in science, I guess, you know, you have to go back to the educational system.
It definitely
and it has to start early. You know,
I have a program right now that's going to be starting right from the third grade, third to fifth grade, called Dr. Do It, and we're going to make that school a medical school, like right from the third grade, where the kids will even have little experiments and have a little white coat on, have a stethoscope to listen to hearts and things like that right then. Because nobody told me to be a doctor. I can only tell you I had no doctors in my family. I knew some doctors, but not closely. I went to the black doctors, but I didn't have anybody to encourage me except one doctor, and his Dr. Walter Slade, who was a professor in neurology here at Downstate, and also the head of neurology at the Brooklyn VA Hospital. And how I got to know him, because we taught Sunday school together. And he would take me out to Sunday school with him on rounds and things like that, and that started me thinking about medicine, you know. And so I don't know how you got interested in medicine. You
know, just to even take it back, there was this book by an author named Jonathan Kozel. He wrote this book called Savage Inequalities within the educational system, and he cites a lot of statistics. And one of the statistics that he was citing is that there's a funding base per student that's federally allotted, which is based on the tax base of the area. So what that reduces down to is in places like Southside Bronx, many inner city urban schools, you have you know, an average of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 of federal money being allotted per student. Meanwhile, if you go out to schools, some of these schools out in Long Island, you have students being allotted 3-4 times as much in terms of the federal allotment because of the tax base. So, in other words, the poorer schools get less money, the richer schools get more money.
There you go.
You know, and so what does that translate to? That translates to higher higher class sizes, lower staff. You know, staff to class ratios end up being lower. The facilities, the science facilities, aren't as quality.
That's right.
There's not as many laboratories. There's not as many field trips. There's not as many. And what you see, what all that translates to now, you take it a step further, is that science is something that cannot be taught in this dry, boring type of way. That turns turns only but the most interested people away.
Of course.
But if you bring it alive, like your Dr. Do It program, which I have to applaud, if you bring it alive by showing how, you know, when you're planting, you know, a herb garden at home on your fire escape, and you go through the phases of germination, and you bring it alive to students, or you show, you know, what's behind a cough.
Of course.
You know, these things, you translate it to real terms that people can understand. Same thing like if you take the math and apply it. I taught math through Kaplan Education Services before I came. It was a little job that I had. And I would always try and bring you know, when I was teaching the basic arithmetic, I would bring in money. You know, to bring it alive to people. And, you know, with the less funding of many of these inner city schools and urban schools, and, you know, one of the things Jonathan Colzo shows in his book, and it's sad to say, is that as many of these schools became higher in the minority content within the schools, the funding went down. Strangely enough.
I know,
And so what that translates to is that science programs that just don't have that vim and that vip.
It's
just, it doesn't have that
teachers
thing.
that can teach it.
Yeah, it's just, you know, and it's not even that the teachers are bad. I'm not trying to say the teachers are bad, but many of these teachers are overworked. They're not getting the funding they want. The textbooks are from many years ago. So, you know, when you get into it, why aren't we? That's, you know, that's a little bit of why the things are the way they are.
Sure. I know my son taught at Martin DePora's high school, which was for kids that were acting up in school, and he was head of their science. And he took the textbook and rewrote the textbook so they would understand it. And he could give them a 20-page test in chemistry, and they could pass it the way he taught about electrons and neutrons and all those kinds. But he stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning to do all of that, you know, and they had a commitment. And then he was a coach of the swimming team as well, but he was making such a small salary he had to get out of it almost, you know. But he used to take
teachers aren't valued.
Yeah, teachers are
undervalued.
Oh yeah, I every time I look at what teachers make out in Long Island, what they make even in a city here is unbelievable, you know. And so they draw the best teachers away from the system, and then they say, well, the children not doing well, the teacher's not doing well, in the way they're presenting a subject. But going from high school, you went to college. Where did you go?
You know, I applied to several colleges, and growing up in Long Island, I think I'd always been kind of in love with New York City, and you know, got into several colleges, but I found that I thought at that time that Columbia University was going to give me the best education.
Okay.
Because I was going to get the social education in New York City and the best of the academics. So I went on to Columbia, majored in biology. I'd always loved chemistry, so I ended up changing into a biochemistry major. And yeah, majored in biochemistry. Started a lot. I've always been interested in research. I always wanted to be Indiana Jones. You know, that was me. You know, from an early age, looking at Discovery Channel programs and stuff. So I started research there with a Dr. Green up at Columbia Physicians and Surgeons up at the med school. You know, he was gracious enough to give me that opportunity with very little research experience, with no research experience. So, you know, that got me started in research. And then when I graduated, you know, I was really much more thinking along the lines of a PhD. I wanted to find answers to questions that are unanswered, that kind of thing. I like that. And so I did about 5-6 years worth of research. Got published in several journals. And
so, you know, how old were you when you got in medical school?
And so that was 5-6 years worth of research. Took a detour, and I worked for Kaplan. And you know, I actually took a detour into some other fields for about a year or two, and then applied to med school. So when I got into med school, I think I was 28.
Yeah, well,
28 years old.
I was 26 myself. You know, surely, and I was going different directions too, in research and public health and all those kind of things, you know, and you're finding your way. But at the same time you were doing all this, you were playing the keyboards.
Yes. The guitar particularly. You know, I come from a very artistic family. That's something that I might have not mentioned in some of these previous interviews. My father's a visual artist. My brother's a filmmaker. My sister's a singer-songwriter. She doesn't have a day job. That's what she does. She's a singer-songwriter. I'm so proud of her. And so the whole family's musical. I think we inherited a lot of this from my father. You know, he got us, gave us music like informal music appreciation when we were growing up.
Is he still living?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes. And he would be listening to songs and he'd say, what's the bass line playing? You know, what's the this, that playing? So we developed that musical appreciation, and I took up, it was really in college the music bug got me, listening to Jimi Hendrix. You know, I was always a real avid rap and reggae fan, and I noticed a lot of the rap, they were sampling James Brown.
Right, surely.
And then I noticed within the James Brown there was something special about the guitar.
Uh-huh.
And then I heard Jimi Hendrix, and it was over. I decided, I want to take up the guitar too.
Oh, that's nice. That's
so
nice.
I was playing many of my years off. I played in bands, sat in on recordings.
Yeah.
And I continue this interest. It's still, I think probably, one of my biggest passions,
Well, tell me this, when you got into med school now.
Yes.
You come here and I don't know how many African Americans were in your class, but all of a sudden you were in the medical school with a whole different environment. How did you feel that first year? Now, this is your third year.
Yeah.
Before you're the fourth year and you'll be graduating. But that first year must have been quite an adjustment for you.
Definitely. Definitely. The first year, I tell some of the first year is that it gets better and better.
Right.
For me, I've heard people say second year is harder than first year because, the volume of work is more and so forth.
Yeah.
But for me, first year was most difficult because of that adjustment.
Yeah.
And particularly for me, I think one of the things that held me back, and one of the things I'd like to reach out to the community and say is that, one of the things that held me back was it was an identity issue. I didn't feel that I was a doctor in terms of my personality. Like when I thought of doctors,
Yeah, right. So.
I thought of these kind of prim, conservative, dry, witless type of people. This is a stereotype, totally incorrect, that I had in my head.
Right. Sure.
And that kind of held me back in a little way. Like that's not me. I'm
Uh-huh.
cooler than that.
Right.
I
I had to just the same way.
I'm listening to Rakim and Eric B. and that's doctors are not for me. Like medicine's not for me. And then coming in, some of that was almost confirmed. I looked around and I felt like, these people, these aren't my people. And it wasn't a racial thing. I was just saying these people are not this is not my character. This is not.
Right.
And and adjusting to the workload and stuff. And then I really began to see, as I met certain people who were musicians, artists. I met yourself, Dr. Deas, which is a huge inspiration to me because, your activism within medicine has always been inspiration. And activism and changing things has always been an interest of mine. I started to see you define it for yourself.
Right.
You define what kind of doctor. Take ownership. You become the kind of doctor you want to be, the kind of lawyer you want to be, the kind of musician you want to be.
Sure.
Nobody can tell you what to do. And I think that first year, I learned to kind of take ownership and realize that I'm going to be who I want to be. I can still play music,
Right, sure.
still do the things I like to do,
Sure.
and at the same time pursue my passions within science.
Well,
so
that's what I did.
most challenging.
I said, well, since I'm the only two blacks in my class, I may as well become president, and deal on a political level with all these. Cause I had been in the Army and all this other stuff, so I could sit right up there with those heads of departments and talk what I wanted to talk, and about representing the student body, In fact, one doctor told us, I said, are there going to be any formulas on the test, the structural formulas in chemistry on the test? He said, no formulas. So I went back to the class, I said, no formulas. And when I got the test, everything was formulas. So I said, what do you mean no formulas? He said, I meant KNOW rather than NO. Those class almost hung me. Because
I could
that was
believe it.
well,
I could believe it. Med students are very serious about it.
That's right. Words are very important, And now you went through your second year and you did well. I mean, when I say did well, you made the grade, took your boards and things like that.
I think moving in the second year, the subject matter becomes a lot more interesting.
Right.
First year is a lot of physiology, the way the body works when things are healthy.
Right.
Second year, you're learning we learn about sicknesses and diseases, when the body works, when things go wrong.
Sure.
And that's why we came into medicine. So it was a lot more interesting.
Sure.
There was more work, but it was more interesting. You weren't pushing yourself as much. You wanted to kind of sit there and study all night, take off a Friday, Friday night and not go out or something, call me next week or, to your friends. So things became more interesting. And then you also kind of understood the studying rhythm a little better. So you understood where you could kind of take time off, when you could go and party if you wanted to or hang out with the family.
Yeah, sure.
And so second year was, that I think further cemented, my ambition within medicine. Because all throughout the first year, I'll admit, there was many a time when I thought, maybe this is not for me, man. think I want to quit.
And how about the third year? Here you are in the third year.
Third year, it's even better. Why? Because being a people person, you know, I feel it sounds a little cliche, but all cliches are cliches for a reason. In that people who are going into medicine love science and they love people.
Right.
So
Okay.
now you're dealing with patients, and you're seeing how something that you read in the book, you're seeing how it presents in reality, and you're seeing how you can reach across and educate people and elicit, take a good history from them, and it's just so much more fun. And now I'm positive that this is to be a doctor, something that I came to do.
Well, that's Dr. Time, brother.
A wordy
And I'm gonna
doctor
tell
at
you,
that.
Ike
Thank you.
Swaby, it's a pleasure being with you today. And to you folks out there, this is Ike Swaby, next doctor you'll see in your community doing the wonderful things that a doctor should do. With his background and with his training here at Downstate Medical Center, he'll do wonderful.